Welcome back, viewers at home. You're still tuned in right here on INX Prime Channel 345, and thank you so much for tuning in. Now, Victor Homo Eswana published Africa is Open for Business in 2014, a book that detailed 50 case studies of some of the most fascinating business stories and their impact on Africa's future. In 2021, he published Africa Bounces Back to highlight how African countries and enterprises managed to bounce back from the COVID-19 pandemic and into some of the leading economies of the globe. Now, as the BRICS summit wraps up in Russia, we examine how South Africa's BRICS membership will advance our country's economic goals and also how this global South bloc is likely to impact the South African continent. We will also discuss how a BRICS currency is likely to impact business on the African continent. Now, Victor joins me now from the University of Limpopo, where he is the Executive Director of Marketing and Communication. Good evening, Mr. Homo Eswana, and thank you so much for joining us here on Prime Live. Apologies, sir. I believe your mic is currently muted. If you can just kindly unmute for us so we can hear the audio. Mr. Homo Eswana, are you still with us?
I am with you. Good evening, Memuna. I wasn't aware that it's mute.
It's okay. It's okay. We definitely understand. Now, before we get into, the nitty-gritties around the BRICS summit, what would be your comment, Mr. Homo Eswana, on the fact that BRICS member states combined account for 37.4% of global GDP? How much of a force is this bloc and what it means for the global South as a whole?
Well, you can't stop the tide of change, Memuna. It's the way the world has been. The world has been dominated by the US and the North for a very long time, or the countries that used to be called the Triad. In the North Americas, the Japans of this world, and of course the UK or Europe in general. And the point is that everything is going to change. Everything must change. They say everything, the only thing that's not going to change is change itself. But it's a matter of, it has been a long time coming. There's a power shift in the world from the west to the east. And it is an undisputed fact that China will be the largest economy, is the second largest economy at the moment, and it is inevitably going to be number one. So it's just part of the trend, the wave of change that started a long time ago that cannot be stopped at the moment. And that's why maybe South Africa wisely aligned itself with those countries, because not only do they have the largest populations of the world, that is China, India in particular, those two between them have over 3 billion people, but they also have the highest percentage of growth in economics. They have the highest or among the highest levels of industrialization. And if you combine them with the Russias of this world, the Brazils, and then add the other 5 members that were admitted last year to make it 11, such as Saudi Arabia, Iran, Ethiopia, Egypt, you realize that this is the future superpower of the world. But unlike the US, that was the superpower as an individual country, this is the superpower that's made of dynamic countries of the world.
Now, I wish we had enough time, because I would have really loved to understand really some of the, key features around, the global shift. Is it because of the constant, war that's currently happening in the world? But Mr. Homo Eswana, what would you say has been the benefit to South Africa since it has been a member of this bloc?
I would not say being a member of the bloc has delivered benefits, because remember how BRICS came about, Memuna. Let's remind the viewers. It came about as a consultant's acronym. A man called Jim O'Neill, I think it was Goldman Sachs, was just analyzing the future drivers of growth in the world economy. And he came to the conclusion that Brazil, India, China, and Russia were going to be the hub or the center of world economic growth. He talked about it as an acronym, and later he added South Africa, but it was a matter of just the economies that are likely to dominate the world economy in the future. It was only after that that the countries themselves came together and started forming the bloc that we know as BRICS, adding other members, but also forming the development bank that they believe will be able to replace the world banks of this world, which were formed after 1945 when the World War ended. So those world banks, the IMFs, have been the dominance of the United States because the US became a superpower at the end of the World War. And now there's in and of itself is not going to deliver any benefits. It's whether or not South Africa can use the leading role that it has on the African continent to unify the African continent around negotiating better deals for itself, especially in dealings with China. Because right now, Memuna, I've got to tell you, Africa is way too indebted to China for its own good.
You know, speaking on development banks, because we understand the role that they play in growing and fostering growth in economies. If we could go back to this year's summit, there is a lot of excitement around the BRICS Development Bank and the disbursement of loans in the local currency of a debtor countries. Is a positive or a negative move in your assessment?
A development bank is always a positive only as far as it offers what is called patient capital. What is patient capital? When you go to a bank, they give you a loan and they expect you to pay back as quickly as possible. They maximize interest. And of course, that's why maybe Islamic banking is an option because it eliminates that. But overall, banks are looking to charge you as much interest as possible and get you to pay as quickly as possible. Development finance institutions, on the other hand, or development banks, tend to offer you longer periods to pay back. They offer less interest rates than normal commercial banks, and they might be interested in your story even if you won't be commercially viable in the short term. That's why it's called patient capital. But in the end, you cannot be too indebted. By that, I mean you cannot end up spending too much or too high a percentage of your revenue on paying debt, especially interest, because then what you're doing, you are stealing from your grandchildren and future generations.
Now, Mr. Khome, are you confident that a BRICS currency could one day become a reality? And if so, how is this likely to impact the continent of Africa?
It might not be a BRICS currency because to get one currency among 11 countries could be a very difficult thing. It could end up being the Chinese currency, or maybe, I do not know. But one thing that is for sure is that the dollar will no longer be as dominant as a currency because already certain countries are beginning to collect their debts that they are owed by other countries in other currencies than the US dollar, which means the power of the dollar will definitely be compromised, eroded. It won't disappear completely, but at least it won't be as dominant as it has been, because it has been a very unjust and unbalanced dispensation to have the currency of one country dominate the world trade the way the dollar has been.
Now, just to close off our conversation, Mr. Khome, what would you say, just overall speaking, in terms of the impact of the BRICS currency over South Africa or the continent itself?
In the end, you will not be exposed to the vagaries of the dollar. Remember, when you owe foreign countries and you have to raise foreign currency to pay them, you end up losing twice if your currency is not very strong. So maybe the luck is that the vagaries of the US dollar will not be a factor or as much of a factor as they have been. Bear in mind, with the war in the Middle East, the dollar becomes unstable in a way, and you don't want to be affected by things that have nothing to do with you. So every time the dollar suffers, it gets weaker or stronger, it's got nothing to do with African countries, but it ends up affecting their fortunes. That has not been a fair dispensation. And I think the new currency, or even if it's not the new currency, but the weakening of the dollar as a dominant force of world trade would help this case of Africa, provided Africa will be organized, get its act together, and have a game plan that is not just dependent on what Brazil, Russia, India, and China are intending to do.
Mr. Khome, thank you so much for joining us and just giving us a bit of insight and understanding in terms of understanding the BRICS currency and all the hype that it comes with.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Viewers at home, that was my guest this evening, who goes by the name of Victor Swana, who is from the University of Limpopo, where he is the Executive Director of Marketing and Communication. That's where we close it off for now. Let's head over to an ad break. See you when we come back.